Chapter 12 is the chapter about the Beinoni. We've gone through everything about, you've got two souls. That's why the long short way and the short long way, etc., etc., etc. How do the souls function? What are your soul powers? What are their capacities? What are their capabilities? They've got the same soul powers. In the godly soul, they're geared one way. In the animal soul, they're geared another way. It's so important to reiterate these points because if someone's born as a bad-tempered person, you can't expect them to not be a bad-tempered person. How can you want them to be anything else? But we're not saying you're born as a bad-tempered person. We're saying you're born with a propensity toward a bad temper, which means that if you give into it, you're going to fall over for it. But you could control it and you could hold it. It's not even saying that you're ever going to be necessarily a happy person. We want you to be a happy person, but you might never be a person who doesn't have that initial inclination to go toward a bad temper. But you could hold it back. So when we speak about what a Beinoni is, the Alter Rebbe is like, a Beinoni is someone who doesn't sin. And you're like, oh, well, that's nice. Who is this for again? Remind me. This is for everyone? Absolutely. That's why we needed the whole build up to this, is that the Beinoni, it's not just, it's that a person doesn't sin, but the biggest thing about the Beinoni is that externally, everything they're doing is correct. Internally, within their nature, it's just keeping themselves under control. That's basically what it is. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that we could do. I was speaking about this with my class yesterday, is that when you realize that everything that's in Tanya, almost everything, we've used it before and we've said it before in actual day-to-day life. But here, the Alter Rebbe takes all this and is putting it to show for self-refinement and our relationship with Hashem. For example, if you're a preschool teacher, you teach your kids, don't hit, use your words. So what are you trying to say? It's not just saying, you're not supposed to hit. You're saying you need to control your actions. If you're angry, don't lash out. That's basically what you're trying to tell a young kid when you say don't hit. As an adult, don't yell at me. If you have something to say, communicate with me like a regular human being. We say these things all the time. So what are we actually saying? I know you're upset right now, but please speak respectfully. Well, how can you say that to someone if speech cannot be controlled? And you're not even saying don't be angry. You're just saying, I understand you're upset, but speak nicely. All these things you realize we do this all the time. Or sometimes if you've ever had, take it a step further, if your friend sometimes says something and you look at them and you're like, what thought process occurred in your brain for these words to come out of your mouth? But also, what are we saying? We're saying you could have done something about this. You can control this. It's obviously much easier to say it to other people, but the fact that we do say it is because deep down we know that this is something that we can do something about it. And that brings us to the Beinoni. That's what the Beinoni is all about. It's not a matter of what your natural inclinations are, because we're all a cocktail, different personality traits and character traits. We have different characteristics that it's all within the same output mechanisms. We all have the same of those, but the mix that we have is different. Some people have greater drives, greater determination, greater passions, greater this, that, whatever. But the way for it to come out, those are all the same. The point is not what our natural inclinations are. The point is it doesn't matter what measure, you're 40% this or 50% this or whatever it is. If you have 50% of one and 20% of another, you're going to have to put more emphasis on the 50% part. The 20% part might be a little bit easier. So the point is not what we've got going on. The point is that we all have the capacity to control it. Now, obviously, what's going on is something for us individually, but as a general idea, we can control it. We don't have to give into it. So that's why even our opening statement is Beinoni hu shel enara gover kol kach l'stavish b'guf l'achtir l'chbosh eser ktana. The Beinoni never, the negative side, the evil side, never controls it. It never takes over one of the three soul garments. It never conquers the little city. The body's the little city, and you have two kings fighting over the city. For a tzaddik, not only is the battle won, but the entire war has been won. It's totally been conquered by the godly soul. And in Russia, depending on how much Russia it is, either the Russia takes over part of it, and it gets beaten back, or the Russia gets, God forbid, take over all of it, and there's a complete Russia. For the Beinoni, the battle is being fought, but the war is never won. The Beinoni kind of wins battles, and the absolute war is never fully won. Which is also why, externally, the Beinoni looks like a tzaddik. But internally, the Beinoni is not a tzaddik. Because internally, the Beinoni still has desires, compulsion, and inclination towards sin. The difference is that it doesn't manifest. Not in thought, not in speech, and not in action. You can't stop it from cropping up, this idea of cropping up, but it depends on what comes after that. Do you entertain it? Do you let it sit, or do you push it away right away? Now, it gets a little bit confusing sometimes, because it seems like for certain people that maybe they have reached the level of tzaddik. Because kiyum beitim u'zamanim, there are certain times the animal soul is totally quiet. The animal soul doesn't even bother. And that would be, for example, for Beinoni during times of davening, or during study or something like that, a time of certain mitzvahs or something, the animal soul is not even going to bother to try to engage in a battle then, because it's like, I know I'm not winning here. This guy has got davening down pat. When he goes to daven, he's absolutely in the davening. He's all there. His focus is totally complete. He's united with God at that moment. It's just a time of light, and I'm not even going to bother. But he's lying in wait to ambush him the moment davening is done. As soon as davening is over, as soon as that moment of being totally immersed in this holy sphere is done, eventually the Beinoni is going to not be davening anymore. Shachris is over, and he doesn't automatically go to Mincha or Meir. So Shachris is over, and he has to go about his day. And that's in the animal soul. It's like, okay, maybe I still have a chance here. So what do we do about that? What is the Beinoni supposed to do? It seems like he tries so hard. He's always fighting. First of all, that's the human condition. That's how much fun we get to have. The war is never fully going to be won. And you can't ever assume that the war is fully going to be won, or else you're not going to, well, if you don't engage, then you fall backwards. So it's like the whole idea of kind of pushing a boulder up a hill or something. Stagnating means that everyone else is going to pass you, but it also means that you're going to start falling backwards. You're not just like, okay, I plateaued here. You always have to keep moving upward. The Beinoni can never say, oh, well, there was no inclination to sin today. I didn't feel my regular thing of eating 14 ice cream, so I must be a tzaddik now. No, just because you didn't feel at this moment doesn't mean that the Nebuchadnezzar Hamas is, he's waiting, okay? He's looking for an opening. You haven't fully conquered him yet. So what's the idea? How do we do anything about this? So this goes to the very well-known phrase of Amach shalat al lev. Mind over matter. The brain, the mind must control the heart. Which also goes back to, I think that we said it before, that a person, man, is born to walk on 2 feet, so our brain should be over our heart. God designed us in exactly, very big hint, very strong indication of what our programming is. Your brain is supposed to rule over your heart, which I was actually thinking about. I wonder if this goes back to some of the questions you guys are asking about, like the whole modern psychology thing. Certain emotions that come in, and then the whole thing is that we're supposed to like watch it and identify where it comes from and things like that, something like that. So I was thinking about it here, if I was thinking about it correctly. These emotions that they could be passing through you, it seemed that the point was not whether or not you were going to do something about it. The point was whether or not you're going to allow the full experience to wash through you. I guess you could say like the full feeling of emotion, I think, to come through and be like, what is this? Where is it coming from? And identify it. It didn't necessarily predict, it seemed that something would come from it. Like, oh, if you're feeling anger, you have to go smash something. What am I feeling right now? This is anger. Where is this anger coming from? Blah, 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 blah. It seemed like that was kind of, yeah, does that kind of make sense? I don't really know this stuff, but it seems like that's what the basic gist of it is. So what it would seem from this chapter, going back to that question, it doesn't seem that Tanya necessarily agrees with this. Just because you're feeling an emotion doesn't mean you have to let it wash through you and all that kind of stuff, for the basic reason that, first of all, one, mind over matter, the mind controlling the heart. So if there's a negative emotion that's cropping up within us, we're not necessarily going to let it sit. Because letting that negative emotion sit is taking a risk of what the negative emotion can lead to, instead of just trying to knock it out right away. The negative emotion in and of itself is not a healthy place for us to be in. And I'm not talking about very specific situations where people have to work through a process. God forbid someone's in a state of grieving or whatever. You have to let them, there's a process that they work through before they can start functioning again. Torah acknowledges that with Shiva and Shloshim and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about as a generic thing and not specific situations. And I'm only saying that specifically because don't give me the examples now of like, but what about? Okay, I hear you. We're talking about it in general terms right now. Thinking about it here, because in general terms, it seems like Tanya does not necessarily agree with this kind of approach. Of just because you're feeling an emotion doesn't mean that that emotion has to necessarily be validated if it's not a good emotion. And then a lot of people today, we're making a generic statement, which each person has to figure out how to apply individually and according to what they're going through in that moment or whatever it is. But this general statement today, it's not the way it goes. Because it's like, well, you're asking me to deny my true self. Why are you shutting me down? Or you're taking away my voice? Or all that kind of stuff. Because in today's society, it's like whatever you're feeling must be spoken. As a general idea, that's kind of where today's society is that there's no requirement of a filter from the brain to the mouth. If you're feeling it, you say it and it's your truth in that moment. Maybe 5 minutes from now, you might feel something else. And that's your new truth in that moment. I'm not going to argue the details of that because sure, if someone's feeling anger and they say, I am feeling anger. And then 5 minutes later, they're watching a comedian and they laugh. How could you be laughing? You're supposed to be in anger. Well, because he was funny, that's why. So we're not going to get into that. It would seem that, especially here talking about the Beinoni, just because you're feeling anger doesn't mean we now have to sit and examine this emotion, because anger in and of itself is not a good thing. It seems that Tanya would say you got to push it out. You also want to have something to replace it with or try to redirect yourself. But it seems like if I'm starting to feel anger come to me, I don't want that to keep coming in. Why would I want the negative emotions to keep coming in? Why would I feel like, because this is what you're experiencing, blah, blah, blah. Well, so what? It's true because I'm feeling it, but that doesn't mean that it's a good thing for me to be feeling. And again, if it's a negative emotion, that's usually not a good thing for me to be feeling, excluding this very specific situations if there's some sort of healing process that someone's going through. But on a general day-to-day basis, if I'm feeling anger, it's probably not coming from a good place. Anger in general is not a good thing, or even sadness that crops up often. And again, if it's not part of the specific process, that sadness, it's specifically not coming from a good place. Well, because in general, human emotions waver, but it's coming from a place of negative forces that are trying to slow down my train of awesome. And I don't want you to slow down my train of awesome. So I'm going to push out the sadness before it can manifest itself. I don't want to see the extent of this sadness. I don't need to see the full picture of this sadness, because now I have sunk myself into sadness, even if it's only for a minute or however amount of time, and that's not a helpful thing for me to be doing. I'm supposed to be doing making lunch. I'm supposed to be doing whatever. There's no place for sadness right now. There are times for sadness, and now during the regular day, it's not it. So considering those things, I don't know that Tanya would fully agree with that whole approach of just let the emotion in and examine it. If someone's going to trek through your house with dirty feet, you're going to have mud in your house. Oh, but I could clean it. Yes, but you have mud in your house. I don't know if that totally addresses it, but from the surface that I know, it seems like that would be an address to that. But what's the purpose of it? What's the purpose of just letting the emotion and experiencing it if there's no end game to it? I don't think Tanya wants you to just let it drive by. If it's not a good thing, I don't think Tanya wants it in there. Tanya says these things crop up, you got to push them out. Because even if you're just experiencing the negative emotion, and we'll focus on negative emotions because I think we could agree on negative emotions being negative. Allowing it in is putting your thought into the space of the negative emotion. And a Beinoni does not put their thought into a negative space. That would actually be where it differs. Is we're just going to let it drive through, and Tanya's like, it doesn't get to go through, you got to push it out. It's similar in the sense of don't engage with it, but in the not engaging with it, it seems like that's where the difference is. One just let it pass through, it's a through lane, and then Tanya's, no, it doesn't get to go through, push it out. Shut the door on it, don't let it come through. No, you're not engaging with it, you're shutting it down. The negative emotion comes in and you say, shut up and get out. But, no, shut up. That's a little bit of a harsh measure. There is no engagement. But I just want to tell you one thing. No, bye. Both agree that you don't necessarily want to engage with it. You don't want to sink into it. But one is saying, let it go and just, okay, move along. And Tanya seems to be saying, shut it down. Push it out. You are not welcome here. Get off my lawn. It's different than saying, sure, you could use my lawn as a shortcut. It's saying, don't even try. No trespassing. It's good because we also realize that even discussing wherever these things align or don't align, it also reminds us of how relevant Tanya is, because these are things that are being dealt with. This is real stuff. Someone was telling me like, oh, this stuff is not applicable. I just need this stuff to be real or whatever. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're dealing with people. Who else deals with people like this? So you usually have to go to psychology or something for that. And here you have Tanya is psychology and self-help and Torah and everything else all at once. Philosophy, hooray. And also, all these things we're saying them kind of casually, but we're not pretending like any of this is easy. Well, in fact, we know most of this is actually very, very hard. We are not denying being realistic about such things. So the this is part of a person's actual nature. The Alter Rebbe tells us, and in a way the Alter Rebbe telling us makes it possible, actually bringing this potential to fruition, that it's within a person's nature. We have the capacity to actually accomplish this. No one said it's easy, but we actually have the capacity to accomplish this, to actually control this. It's usually a little bit easier to see in very specific situations. Someone pisses you off and you're just like, bite your tongue and don't reply. Don't say anything. That was my thought questions for the high school Tanya class that I had them do. I give them the weekly thought questions they have to figure out. I said, this week, some point this week, possibly, well, especially because you're teenagers, the possibility is much greater. You probably will get into an argument with someone this week. What you got to do when you're in that argument, you don't retort. Bite your tongue. And then think to yourself, did the conversation go so different because I didn't get my line in? So this is actually something that we can try sometimes, because part of being able to do that effectively, that you really just, you walked away from the retort, I guess you could say, not just walk away from the conversation, but you walked away from the retort, means that you can't keep playing it over in your mind afterward. You have to shut it down. So you're in this back exchange, whatever it is, and they're being annoying, and you want to say something, and it's going to be good. And then you bite your tongue, and then ask yourself, did the conversation really go any different? Usually the answer is no. The only difference is like, oh, I didn't score an extra point against them. But then after that, the moment of biting the tongue is you shutting off the conversation in your head. Because usually then we'll leave the conversation, and we rehash it 12 times. I should have said this, and why did I say this, and wasn't it so great when I said this? Then you don't do that at all. And it's hard. So it's a small experiment that you could try to see, well, that was very hard, but I actually kind of did it. That's why you do need to have something ready to replace, because your mind's going to want to grab onto something. So you got to have something ready there for your mind to grab onto in that moment. It's interesting when you try out these little things like this. And then you realize that other times when you do speak back and you yell back, whatever, you realize that I'm yelling back right now because I'm just not interested in trying to stop myself. It's not because I can't. I could, and I know because I've tried it already. But right now I'm not in the mood. I'm not in the mood of controlling everything. I want to be mad. I want to yell at someone. So that's why I'm doing it. If nothing else, we could have the honesty saying, I know who I am and I know what I'm doing right now. That's for us who are not on the Beinoni level yet. But the point is the Beinoni, that's where the Beinoni's at. And then we have his pasuk from Shlomo Melch said, and I've seen now that there is an advantage of wisdom over folly, the same as light over darkness. And when you just look at the pasuk like that, you're like, oh, okay. We need Shlomo HaMelech to tell us this? We couldn't figure out that light over darkness, wisdom over folly? Oh, of course there's more to it than that. That the Alter Rebbe is bringing it down the same way that a little bit of light can get rid of a bunch of darkness. How do you get rid of darkness? You yell at it, sweep it away. You have to push it away. You need a baseball bat to get rid of darkness. You need a little bit of light. A little bit of light pushes away a lot of darkness. That's the nature of the world. You need a tiny, tiny bit of light, and it's like magic. The darkness just goes. What Shlomo Melch is saying is the same idea. You need a little bit of wisdom to get rid of a lot of bit of folly. Real truth, which would be Torah, and real wisdom. What are we saying here for folly? The natural inclination toward indulgences, desires, transgressions, whatever it is, we counter that, filling our minds with a little bit of wisdom, which would be Torah mitzvahs. It also kind of aligns with part of what the whole Hasidic philosophy is compared to Mussar or something like that, which is some people approach Judaism by just stay away from all the darkness, basically. Don't sin or you're going to go to hell. Versus Chassidus tries to take a much more positive approach of look what a precious and beautiful thing we have. Let's not ruin this beautiful thing. This is a total side thing. I think it's in the Gemara, it talks about that you can make a fence of roses. Oh, we spoke about it before, I think. Why do you have a fence of roses versus a fence of like a material? You have a barbed wire fence. The other kind of fences are stay out kind of fences. You can't climb the fence or you don't want to get shocked. But a fence of roses, you don't cross the fence of roses because you don't want to ruin the roses. They're so beautiful. That's kind of the light over darkness approach in our approach to Judaism. Understand what an amazing thing we have and see how beautiful what we have is. You have to appreciate what it means to have a relationship with God. You have to appreciate what it means to refine yourself and make yourself better. And in that appreciation, that automatically creates a safeguard against mucking it up, we hope. More proofs that have been brought down for us. That a person doesn't sin unless a spirit of folly enters them. We sort of did this in chapters 7 or 8, where the foreign demon versus like the Jewish demon that comes in. Because our natural state is not to sin. The natural inclination is towards negative things, toward indulgences, but that doesn't necessarily mean our natural inclination is towards sin. So why does a person transgress? Is because this outside influence comes in. That's where the rational lies, kind of like, oh, it's not so bad. Oh, it's okay. Oh, you've already done this. So who cares if you do this also? So that's the ruch shtus that comes over someone. That sense of, it's not so bad. It's not specifically in the chapter of Tanya, but we also have Ezu Gibar Kovish Yitzro, who's a strong person, someone who overcomes their inclination, desire. That's where real strength comes from, is controlling your natural self. This is one of the first questions I asked the high schoolers. True freedom comes from control of the self. True or false? And a lot of them were like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, that's not true freedom. Because any control is already control. And that's a bad thing. The freedom that comes from controlling yourself means that you're not slave to the desires of your body. So people hear the word control and they get like, no, we don't want any controllingness. You could say maybe from discipline of the self, if that's a better word, more palatable word to say. Because where does true strength come from is from saying, just because I have a compulsion for something doesn't mean I have to do it. Which again is very against what modern society is today. But this is what the Beinoni does. Beinoni, the desire for sin, for transgression, for indulgence, it's still there. Which also makes us understand how the Alter Rebbe could expect us to be a Beinoni. Because it's not like, seriously, you want us to be someone who doesn't sin? We know you're a Rebbe and you've opened up the pathway for us by telling us that this is possible, but it still seems a little bit unrealistic. But it is realistic when we realize that all you have to do is just contain yourself. Not deny your true self, blah, 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 blah. Take the raw materials that you've got, which is your natural self, and refine them a little bit. Don't just go and throw a bundle, this whole jumbo down and be like, look, I created art. No, you didn't. You have to assemble the pieces somehow. And then you could have created art. Now, that's why for everything, even though outwardly a Beinoni seems like he's a tzaddik, he's still not actually a tzaddik. Because inside, he's still fighting for control. He doesn't actually sin, but he still kind of wants to. And it also talks about how sometimes even in his thought, it might pop up these initial flashes, desires for sin. And sometimes that could be even worse than actual sin in the sense that thought is more refined. Not only that, because what it does is it creates a distraction. So if a person's supposed to be studying Torah and they have this moment of, I don't know, whatever it is, let's go to a baseball game. What do people think about these days? Or they're like, hey, let's go see a movie tonight or whatever it is. You could say whatever you want, but the point is that it broke up the moment of Torah study. So that's why in a way it could be even worse because It's not just that you're going about your day and you're having these thoughts that you're battling, but when you're actively doing something that you're supposed to be doing and it distracts you and it tries to redirect you. So that's how it could be something that's even worse. It wraps up. So what does the Beinoni do? He has to push it out right away, right, which we kind of covered already. He pushes it right away, and it even mentions that there are certain sins that occur on a daily basis that almost no one is safe from. So that means even someone who's a Beinoni, who's refined themselves so much, it's very possible for him that these three things will still be pretty active. The initial pop-up is still going to be pretty active. Thoughts of transgression, which is a pretty cumulative topic. Proper concentration in davening, where we're talking about kavana in davening is something that almost everyone is challenged with. Again, even to the point where you're saying Shema, you're doing your thing, and it's just a moment of like, oh wait, am I smelling coffee? What's wrong with thinking about coffee? Nothing, but you were in the middle of concentrating during Shema. It's the breakup of the concentration that occurred. That's where the problem is. And then slanderous gossip, so Lashon Hara. And that's a lot of times people don't, I didn't say Lashon Hara because blah, blah, whatever. We start equivocating. But Lashon Hara is something that also, these three are something that we battle daily. And almost no one doesn't face these. One more thing about the Beinoni. All these things that we've had until now are mainly between Adam and Makam, and it says all this stuff is also true of Ben Adam Chavero, even to the extent that a Beinoni is going to have an initial inclination to do something not nice to somebody else with their mind. They not only control that, but they then go and do the opposite of what their heart is telling them to do. So it's like lash out in anger. Not only are they not going to lash out in anger, they'll reach out in love. They'll reach out in peacefulness and calmness. So it's not just a matter of controlling to not do something, but even to the extent of controlling to then elicit the opposite positive action. That is chapter 12.